Hello everyone and welcome to SwitchUp. In today's video we're going to have a look back at the games that got the highest scores on the channel for the last month of 2021, of course, that being December. Now if you've been around the channel before, you may well know that last month we did our 12 days of SwitchUp series, which did mean that we couldn't review as many games as per usual. We reviewed 8 games in the end over the month, so instead of what we usually do in this video where we pick the 10 best scores for the month, in this one we're just going to round up those 8 games, starting with the lowest rated and going all the way up of course to the highest. So which game got the highest score for the month? Well, let's find out. Kicking us off then, in 8th place for the month was Transient Extended Edition. This is a 3D adventure game set in a cyberpunk universe, but which tells a story which borrows heavily from Lovecraftian lore. It's most akin to a walking simulator in that you will move between various locations, solving puzzles in order to advance the story, and to give credit where it's due, the puzzles were definitely the strongest element of the game. The story, whilst certainly intriguing, was just a bit too confusing, and even after finishing the game, which only takes about 5 hours, I was still quite lost in regard to what had happened. I did enjoy it though, but would advise waiting for a sale. It got a SwitchUp score of 70%. Next for the month was Big Brain Academy Brain vs Brain, which is the 3rd game released in this series, but the first since the Wii version back in 2007. This is essentially a selection of puzzle-based minigames, all split into categories with the intention of improving your brain ranking each day, thus increasing your proficiency at each game. There are gold medals to go for each game, and a multiplayer mode which, due to including the ability for each person to choose their own difficulty setting, stays very competitive and therefore is a lot of fun to play with younger family members too. On the more negative side, there was no real track of progress from week to week, plus whilst the games themselves could become fiendishly difficult, it was quite easy to obtain a high brain score almost straight away, which diluted the motivation to return. A good game though, and one that my daughter and I have had a lot of fun with, plus I have seen the physical version going for around £18 already, which is a fair bit cheaper than the eShop price if you are interested. It got a SwitchUp score of 73%. Coming in at number 6 for the month was Beyond a Steel Sky. This is actually a follow-up to a game that came out back in 1994 called Beneath a Steel Sky. Developed by Revolution Software, it had Charles Cecil, who would go on to make Broken Sword, The Shadow of the Templars, and comic book artist Dave Gibbons, who did the art for Watchmen amongst many others, collaborating on this project. It was a point-and-click adventure game and received critical acclaim upon its release. This new game is set 10 years after the events of the first one, and again had input from Cecil and Gibbons, with this continuity allowing for a similar atmosphere. It has some interesting ideas such as its hacking mechanics, and performance is okay, although there are times where it does struggle and assets will load in at a moment's notice. It is also quite expensive and ultimately just plays things a bit too safe. Fans of the original will no doubt enjoy it though, you just might want to wait for a price drop first. It got a SwitchUp score of 75%. In 5th place we had Gearshifters, which is an interesting concept with it having roguelite elements but almost playing like a horizontal version of arcade classic Spy Hunter. You must take on a number of enemies as you drive along the stretch of road that represents each stage before taking on a larger than life boss at the end. New weapons and abilities will be unlocked across each run. Whilst providing fast and furious fun, it could feel a little unbalanced at times, with it feeling as if certain weapons were almost essential for particular enemies and bosses, and there were a few stutters in terms of performance. Certainly fun to be had here though, and it got a SwitchUp score of 78%. In 4th place for the month was a first person shooter called DUSK. This takes inspiration from the shooters of old, such as Doom and Quake, both in terms of its gameplay mechanics but also its aesthetic, and it does a fantastic job of replicating the feel of such classic games whilst being its own thing at the same time. The shooting feels great and performance is very good, running at 60 frames per second, and whilst it does have to compete with a lot of the games that inspired it, most of which are on the Switch and for very good prices it must be said, plus there is a lack of multiplayer that works against it. If you are looking for a new experience, then this is definitely worth seeking out, and it got a SwitchUp score of 85%. Into the top 3, and in 3rd place for the month was Life is Strange True Colours. This is the 3rd main game in the Life is Strange series and the 5th game overall, and it focuses on the story of Chen, who is trying to solve the mystery behind her brother's death. It runs on the Unreal 4 engine, and games running on Unreal have certainly had a mixed record on the Switch so far, but to be fair, this game certainly nails performance, running fantastically well, so much so that it made our recent best ports list. The story is interesting with a heavy emphasis on characterization, and the audio is another high point which really does help to round out the narrative and increase production values. With that said, it is very expensive on the Switch, but this aside, it's a great game and it got a SwitchUp score of 86%. In 2nd place for the month was actually our final review of the month, coming out just a few days ago, and this was a lovely little game called Chicory, A Colourful Tale. This is a top-down adventure game with an interesting paint mechanic. Not only must you restore colour to the world by literally colouring in the backdrops as you go, but you can also use paint to assist you in navigating certain platforms, for example, or even finding hints on the floor to help you with the various puzzles that you will come across in the game's dungeons. Whilst there are no general enemies in the world, you do come across boss battles in the aforementioned dungeons and have to find their weak points using the paint. This is all backed up with a beautiful score by Lena Rain, which elevates the experience further still. A few crashes during our reviewer's playthrough did knock the score down a tad, possibly denying it first place in the process, but it got a very respectable SwitchUp score of 89%. And in 1st place for December was Loop Hero. Another game published by those with the Midas touch over at Devolver Digital. They really can pick a gem of a game, that's for sure. This is a roguelite, but it gets that addictive quality which is essential for such games absolutely spot on. There's a large amount of strategy involved as you pick perks to build your character, and you must use the world around you as well as the cards at your disposal to your advantage. The gameplay manages to feel unique in terms of its loop, no pun intended, and it is also blessed with a fantastic soundtrack. On the more negative side, there were again a couple of crashes during the playthrough, which was disappointing of course, but it's a fantastic game on the whole and one that received a SwitchUp score of 90%. So there you have it, there were the 8 games reviewed during the month of December. I'm sure this month we'll get back to a fuller review schedule, and I'll be able to pick the 10 highest scoring games again as per usual for this series. I hope 2022 is treating you well so far, and it's nice to see you back with us. Please do let us know if you picked any of these games up, and what was your favourite game for the month of December, if not one of these. A quick thank you to our Patreons as always for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.